company. It turned out that we were building a lot of really interesting information systems. It turns out that actually none of them solved the problems that they were intended to solve. We decided that was an issue, that if we're going to build information systems, that they should actually be systemic and solve systemic problems. So we began running a workshop on systems thinking, having learned something about it ourselves. And we ran the workshop for 12 people at a time, probably 50 times within 3M over the next several years. Subsequently, I've incorporated it into consulting work that I do. For 15 years, I taught a course at Hamlin targeted at teachers making the transition to administration, transferring to the dark side and becoming a principal. Also, I still continue to work after a period of 5 years where I was not working at 3M. I'm back at 3M doing the stuff I was doing before now, except now I do it as a consultant. And part of that involves helping people look at complex problems, thinking about them systemically. So I want to start with a word association kind of thing. When I say system, what comes to your mind?
Entire value stream. Entire value stream.
Okay, okay. The entire value stream, okay. What else? Someone give me an example of a system that comes to mind. Government. This is a fabulous one to hold in abeyance as we look at how we define a system. But we talk about systems like the Federal Reserve System and interest rates. We talk about the library system. We talk about a school system, which is another one which is kind of doubtful in some cases. And those are essentially social systems, which are the most complex kind. We also, presumably you all came here in an automobile. Your automobile is in fact a transportation unit within a transportation system, which is interesting at this time of day in Shoreview, trying to get here from someplace else. But your car is actually a super system which contains an ignition system and an exhaust system and an electrical system. So we have and those are mechanical systems, and those are the easiest ones to deal with. So we have systems which go from the mechanical, which are fairly straightforward, to the organic, like the ecosystem or a biological system. And then we have social systems, and they're the ones that we spend most of our time in and are the ones that are hardest to work with, hardest to predict. So I'd like to spend a few minutes offering a little bit of background in notation, some of the language of systems thinking. And then I would like to spend as much time as we can actually trying to think about the problem that Karen approached me with and came over lunch one day, which is this issue of paraphrasing radically, sort of getting people to be more committed, more present, retaining members, and spending less time having to go out and recruit new members. So how do we look at the value stream for membership? Okay, so that's sort of the framework of what I'd like to do. Here it comes. Yes, I know the links don't work if you're not hooked up to the net. I know that. Karen says that for a variety of reasons she was not able to make paper copies of this, so I have this one. She has it on a thumb drive, and she's going to make copies available electronically somehow.
Yep.
So I apologize for the fact that you actually have to pay attention. So I'm going to back up a second. You all are. What does the ASQ actually stand for? This is a quiz.
It doesn't.
Formerly American Society for Quality.
Okay. And so how long has the organization been around?
1948.
69 years.
So like since the beginning, coming out of the Operations Research School, which is the same thing that systems thinking came out of. So if I talk to you about computer chips, I see some people who have gray hair, they will remember the 1980s or have read about this. Younger people will have read about the 1980s. There was, in fact, a chip manufacturer located in Arizona, and during their budgeting process, they got to all the things taken care of on their sheet, and they had I'm going to make up numbers just because they're easy to make up. They had $10 left over, and someone said, "Gosh, we got $10. What should we do with $10?" And someone who had just been to a quality circle meeting someplace, said, we should spend it on quality. We should spend it on quality. So they did. They took the $10 and they spent it on quality that year. And the real number is they actually got a 10-fold increase in the number of sellable, marketable chips that they got out of the same number of resources, the same amount of raw material on the same fabrication line. 10-fold increase. This is a huge deal, right? So the next year it's the same thing. They're going through the budgeting cycle, and they say, well, we got $12 left over. What should we spend it on? And several hands go up, and they say, let's spend it on quality. That's such a good deal. So they spent it on quality, and again, true, they got like a 5 or 6-fold increase again. So what had been 100,000 chips became 1 million chips, and then 1 million chips became like 5 million chips. The next year, the company's on the brink of bankruptcy. Why?
Overproduction, not knowing the actual demand of the.
Because they got no place to sell 5 million chips. Because the market could afford, 100,000 or maybe 500,000, but not 5 million. The market just wasn't there. They spent all of their money, all of their efforts improving quality and spent no time improving marketing, right? So they optimized one part of the system, but sub-optimized the other part. So this is a picture of that story. I need a pointer, and I don't think I brought one. So I'll just stand here and point. That's good. I did bring a pointer, but it's got to be a tall. So what happened was they had a decision to make of where should they spend their money, and their decision was to spend it on quality efforts. As a result, the improvement on quality metrics, and as a result, the decision next time was let's spend more money on quality. But obviously, the amount of resources that you have is fixed. So as you spend more money on quality, you necessarily spend less money on marketing, which means you do worse on the marketing indicators. So the next time the decision comes, should we spend the money on the slugs in marketing or the stars in quality? Clearly, you're going to spend the money on stars in quality, but you can only do that so long before things get just completely out of whack. So this is the essence of the question.
Yeah, I'll contest that one statement about that your people resources, that's fixed, or that's because we always look at, say, okay, what are we doing, and we say we try to eliminate those activities that are not either high priority or not value added. And so, as a result of that, we actually, without increasing the number of people, we increase our people resource.
Okay. So what does that do to this story?
Well, if they have
It's still
fixed money.
Unless we reallocate that additional time to those things that we need for the organization, for the larger picture system, we haven't gained anything.
Let me echo that back and see if I'm understanding what you're saying. What this picture is trying to say is that given a fixed pool of resources, the more we allocate one way, necessarily the less we allocate some other way. Now it could be there are things we can prune from either process, which allows us to allocate the money more smartly. But if I got $100 to spend and I got 2 things to spend it on, if I spend 60 on one, that leaves only 40 for the other. If I spend 70 on one, it's only 30 for the other. And the question becomes, how do I determine where to spend the money? That's what I'm ultimately after, is how do we determine where to focus our attention? Okay, so each of these things is called a variable. Systems thinking is really easy at its most elemental. It's only a couple of things you need to worry about. Each of these things is called a variable because it can vary over time. We could draw a process chart of it. It goes up and down, or it goes steadily upward. This is, so this thing is called a variable, and this is in between is called a link or a mental model. The mental model is, why is it that I think that as this changes, this changes? As this one changes because, and whatever comes after because, that's your belief, that's the assumption you're making, that's your mental model of how the world is hooked together, okay? So if you understand this part, we're 80% of the way home, okay? So now we add a little more stuff to it, a little bit more notation. The S, like this one, means that as this one changes in the same direction. So as quality efforts go up, performance on quality metrics goes up. As the performance on quality metrics goes up, the allocation of money to QA over marketing goes up, which means the quality efforts go up even higher, which means the quality performance goes up even higher, and we have a very happy spiral upwards, right? This is an interesting one because as we allocate money to marketing, not to QA instead of marketing, there's an O here, and the O stands for opposite. Yeah. So as we allocate money to marketing, to quality instead of marketing, the marketing efforts go down. As this goes up, this goes down. This goes down, this goes up. this goes down, and so this is what's known as a reinforcing loop, which means whichever way it gets started, it wants to keep going that way. It just goes up and up and up forever, or down and down and down forever. In systems thinking language, this is what's called an architect question.
Where I can't follow the logic is why, as the quality efforts, we spend more money, our performance goes up, why does that automatically mean we're going to spend more money on quality?
That's a great question, and in many cases it's a knee-jerk reaction to where have we spent money in the past and seen a benefit. Well, we should do that again. That's the knee-jerk sort of non-thinking approach. You're not buying it, huh?
No.
But it happens.
Okay.
The squeaky wheel gets the most grease.
Regardless of whether it's the best wheel.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's
Yeah.
just it. It's to me, it's losing its squeak as the performance metrics get
And
better.
as long as we don't have anything involved like politics or things like that, democracy or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have here the S's and the O's. This means, again, as this one changes in the same direction. As this one changes in the opposite direction. When you hook these things together into a cycle, you get a feedback loop. Feedback loops come in exactly two varieties: a reinforcing loop, which tends to go up forever or down forever, or a bouncing loop, which just has a natural oscillation. Now, the question of government. Is government a system? Well, a system is a perceived whole whose elements hang together because they continually affect each other over time and operate toward a common purpose. Now, does government qualify as a system under this definition?
No.
It's a little touch and go. Many school systems don't qualify as a system under this definition, which is unfortunate. But that's, this is the formal definition we work with. We talked about different kinds of systems. One of my favorite writers just died a couple of years ago, a guy named Russell Ackoff, who was also started out in the 1940s in the operations research arena. Social systems are systems that have purposes of their own, like a division in a company, are made up of parts that have purposes of their own, like the departments within the division, and are parts of larger systems like company that have purposes of their own, and include other divisions which have purposes of their own, which include departments which have purposes of their own. This is why social systems are such a mess to work with, because you have all these things which tend to be not coordinated, unless you're a part of a really fabulous organization where there is a clear, well-defined, well-articulated, broadly understood, and routinely bought into mission. If everybody's on the same page with what we're trying to accomplish, then this is a much less a problem, because the purposes are aligned. Purposes are tied together somehow. So we have variables, something which changes over time. We have external variables and we have internal variables. An internal variable is something which is both a cause and an effect. If we go back to this picture, if you look at this particular item, it's both a cause and an effect, depending on where you start telling the story. If you look at the one up in the middle, it has an arrow coming into the system, but nothing going into it. So it's what's called an external variable. It does not have arrows going in and out, so we call it an external, or technically an exogenous variable. What also we have is links or mental models. How is it that this causes that? We're talking about cause and effect. When I work with people who have a very strong engineering bias, like many of my friends at 3M, they tend to see things as this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And what they're talking about is not cause and effect, but a series of things. It's a process of things. Like if we go back to a school example, first we order the books, and then we distribute the books, and then we make homework assignments. But that's not cause and effect. That's just a sequence of events, a sequence of things that we do. We don't distribute the books because we ordered them. We don't give homework because we have the books. That's just a sequence that we have to police, the process we have to police. But the cause and effect model is a different kind of animal. So thinking in terms of cause and effect is alien for some people. The mental models, this is what I was just talking about. As X changes, Y changes because, so for instance, in this example, again, you may or may not buy this example, but this is an example that I extracted from a paper written by John Forster and John Sturman, which is referenced at the back of the handout. So this is what they say. As the performance of marketing changes, the allocation of dollars to quality assurance over marketing changes in the opposite direction, because we need to put our resources where we've seen some return on investment. We've spent money on quality. We've seen some improvement there. We're going to spend more money there and get more improvement, obviously. Question?
Yeah, I've got this question. Why are you saying that the income is fixed? I mean, if it's a business, they make more and more money, so they have more money to blow. I know
Okay, then let's not think of it in terms of a fixed amount. Think of it in terms of a fixed percentage. 70% is always going to go to quality, and 30% goes to everything else. 70% goes to personnel, 30% goes to everything else. Whatever the I'd like us not to get too focused on the actual numeric value, and instead understand what are the causes and effect relationships. I don't mean to put you off.
No, it's just hard for me not to think that the business would make money and wouldn't have more money to spend.
Yeah, the pot
It's
being
kind of like not
allocated is
Think of it as allocation, maybe?
yeah, maybe energy as opposed to dollars. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Oh, let me back up a second. I mentioned that that this kind of picture is what we call an archetype. The archetype that fits this picture is called success to the successful. So let's remove it from the business world altogether, and let's talk about government, because we all like to talk about government. So let's pretend that she's the congresswoman from the 5th district, and he is the congressman from the 4th district. Yeah, they're both crooks. No, we're not. Fabulous job of getting some earmarks written into legislation for her district. So it turns out that defense contractors move in, which means that colleges want to put research departments there, and so we get all of a sudden a lot of things going in because she's doing such a good job articulating the needs of her district and brokering things so it goes her way. Meanwhile, this gentleman here is doing a less effective job, and so his district is not doing as well. So the worse his district does, the worse his district does. It's not an attractive district. No one wants to move there. Contractors are not moving there. Contractors moving across the street into her district. So the more attractive her district becomes, the better she does.
Detroit.
The better she does, the better she does, the better she does, and the better she does, the worse he does, and the worse he does, the worse he does. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of archetype. Here we're not talking about, numerics. It's the reputation of the district or something like that. Another example. For a while, for 12 years, I served on the board of a nonprofit. The nonprofit worked with people with severe and persistent mental illness. It turned out that at one particular month, my agency, I call it my agency, Task Unlimited Incorporated, for some reason we got a whole bunch of clients, like 10 or 12 all at one time, right out of the state hospital, and they were not stable on the medications, and they had a very difficult time going through our training program and getting gainfully employed. As it turns out, by coincidence, across town, another agency got a crop of 10 or 12 very high-performing, very stable clients. They still had the diagnosis of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, but they were in a more stable condition, so they went through training very quickly and got jobs very quickly. Now it turns out that based on that, whatever caused that, suddenly our reputation takes a hit, and now they say, well, they're not doing very well, we'll give them the low-performing clients. These guys are stars, we'll give them the high-performing clients. It's the same thing. It's success to the successful. We take people who've got a reputation for doing good things. Look at, you're the principal of one school, you're the principal of another school. For some reason, you get some kids that are really good at math. That means you can have a good math program, you get good math scores, you get good publicity. All the good math kids want to come to your school, so you get the best math teachers, you get the grant from Bill Gates to put computers in. Meanwhile, Karen is stuck with the average kids, and suddenly now her kids get worse and worse and worse comparatively, and yours get better and better and better comparatively. But it was sunspots. It didn't have anything to do with a conscious decision you made. It was just the way things worked out. So that's a really long way of saying, let's not focus so much on the money and the fixed pot aspect of it as the cause and effect stuff, and looking at what is it that causes what. Okay. But these are interesting questions, and it makes me think about stuff as I try to answer it. So, two kinds of loops: balancing loops or reinforcing loops. The classic balancing loop is the thermostat. You know, the heat comes on until it gets too warm, and then the heat goes off and it starts to get cold, and then the heat comes on, and so on. And the goal is stability around some desired median value, performance around that, with a tolerated oscillation, variation. The only piece, so now are you all serious? You're still tracking with this, right? This is all like pretty elementary stuff. This means yes. This means no, and this means I haven't been paying any attention. Okay. So the only thing we're missing, so now you're like 95% of the way through systems thinking. What's basically missing now is this thing here, which is called a delay. It turns out that in some cases, the passage of time allows me to disconnect the cause from the effect mentally. When that happens and we're building a model of a system, we put that delay indicator to say, don't forget that this happens because this happened, because our tendency is to disconnect it. So for instance, it might be, gosh, we spend a lot of money going out and doing a bunch of recruiting at really high-powered universities and get a bunch of really great people for our organizations. And then next year the money for recruiting goes down, or next year money for recruiting goes down, and someone says, gosh, we're not getting the high-quality candidates. We should do what's up. And someone says, don't forget that the cause of the effectiveness of the recruiting program is because we spent a lot of money on it that year. We took some of our best and brightest young people who could most attract people like them to come in and join our organization. Don't forget that. So when we see that kind of thing happening, we indicate it with a delay just to remind us that there's a delay, there's a cause and effect here. It's not simply the passage of time. It's the passage of time that permits our brain to disconnect the cause from the effect. And now you've got 100% of systems thinking. Now you're all experts. Now from here on, it's all downhill.
Oh, so you're like it's like golf then, right? You take a minute to understand and lifetime to master.
How hard is golf? Golf's not even a real sport.
Not till certain people.
Isn't that what they say about a minute to learn and a lifetime to master is golf? And I think
like
systems thinking is.
When
we had lunch, I had the same thought. So.
Lifetime and thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So. When we brought this workshop into 3M Company in 1994, 1995, we paid $10,000 for three people, for two guys to come in for 3 days and teach a workshop. And at the end, we said, well, that was really average. For $10,000 in 1995, we would have expected better than average, but it was just average. So we started talking about why was it just average, and we concluded that the thing that was missing from it was the opportunity to figure out what the problem was you were trying to solve. All the problems they gave us were canned problems. Here's a problem, solve this problem. Here's a problem, solve this problem. Well, it turns out life frequently doesn't operate that way. That in many cases, the hardest part of the problem is figuring out what the problem is.
So you couldn't translate. You couldn't translate whatever they were telling you
Right.
into real life.
Yes, they were artificial, but not only were they artificial, but they were prepared in advance. It was processed foods. So we took, in the spirit of 3M innovation, we took another idea from another guy and coupled it with the systems thinking approach. And this is called the triggering question or the why question. Because what we want to do is to make sure we're focused on the right question. So we have a why question, and we insist that it has these pieces. Why does variable X exhibit troublesome behavior Z? It has three essential components. It has to begin with the word why. It has to identify the problematic variable, and it has to say what's happening that's unacceptable. Now, unacceptable is interesting. If we're talking about healthcare cost, why do healthcare costs keep going up? Might be a reasonable question. And going up is the unacceptable behavior. If we're talking about education and the achievement gap, why is the achievement gap staying the same? Staying the same is the problem. We're investing resources and energy. It ought to be going down. Staying the same is not okay. We might talk about an organization and say, why is morale slipping? Going down is the problem. Why is our travel budget out of control? Why does it oscillate so much? Too much variation is the problem. The key thing is the word why. What's the variable we're focusing on, and what's it doing that's not acceptable? What's not okay? Now, some of you may have been at some point in especially human resources. Anybody here from human resources? No one's willing to admit it yet. In many cases, human resources workshops will give you a piece of advice like this. Oh, never ever begin a question with the word why. Because when you say to someone, why is your project late? Why can't your staff be here earlier? Why can't you come up with a reasonable forecast? I'm telling you, as a recovering English major, the problem is not that the question begins with why. The problem is that the word right after that is you or your. That's what puts people on the defensive. How many of you have been around kids that are 2 or 3 years old lately?
And their favorite.
How,
I have a 3.5-year-old.
there you go. And what are the two most common words out of that two?
Why and what?
Why and what?
Why, what, how?
Why and, well,
No.
typically no. Typically it's why and no.
Why and no.
You know, and they're not trying to accuse anybody of anything. They're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. You know, why is it that I have to eat the broccoli before I can have the ice cream? Why do I have to sit in a car seat when Sally doesn't have to? Why does the hot water come out of that side? Why do I have to close the door when I go outside? Why do I have to wear a bicycle helmet? You know, they're just trying to figure out what's going on. They're not trying to accuse anybody of anything. Why questions lead to understanding, as long as they're not blame-inducing. So one of the premises of systems thinking is we're not trying to figure out whose fault it is. We're trying to understand how the system works and why this variable is not up to our standards. Why is it not working the way we want it to? So we insist on the why question. In my experience, having done this kind of work for over 20 years now, when we pull a group of people together, and typically a good-sized group is like 6 or 8 people, the first thing we do is figure out what's the question we're working on. You know, thanks for coming. What's the question we're working on? And we write it down and we put it up on the wall right in front of everyone in big letters. In order that, if Ashish offers some kind of, I'll get it right, give me time, offers some kind of a comment, I can say, that's really fabulous. Help me understand how it ties to this question, because I thought this is what we were talking about. And then the burden is on him to make a connection there. And so it's okay for me, it needs to be okay for me to do that. We need to be in a sufficiently trustful environment that I could say, I don't understand that. Help me understand how that relates to this question, because I thought this was talking about. In my experience, after about 45 minutes, about 2/3 of the time, someone will say something like this: holy crap, that's the wrong question. And then we will reframe the question, we'll pick a new question, we'll all agree on that, and we take the old one, we throw it away, and we start with the new question. We're adults, we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to say we started off on the wrong track, we're going to get back on the right track. This is a better question. My favorite example was I was working with a handful of IT mid-level managers at 3M, and the question was about the turnover rate at 3M. It had gone up. It had gone up radically, from like 2% to like 4% per year. Any of you know anything about the turnover rate in IT? At this point, it was running in the industry around 15–18%. 3M was panicking because theirs had doubled, but it had doubled from 2 to 4. So it's like, we got to do something about turnover retention rate. So I was asked to facilitate as group manager to think about it. I'm going to draw a picture. This goes under here. The spring is strong enough to just hold it. So we just jam it on there.
Is that terrible?
That's okay. It'll work. I'll be gentle.
Okay.
So the idea was the variable, the critical variable was the turnover rate. So we put that in the middle. Turnover rate. And the question is, why is the turnover rate going up? This is a calamity. And so we talked about it for a while, and they decided, well, here's something that affects the turnover rates, the competitive marketplace. And here's something else that affects the turnover rate, it's employee satisfaction. Well, if your thinking is that limited, there's only 2 causes of the turnover rate, and it's the competitive marketplace and employee satisfaction. That leaves you then only 2 places to intervene. So one strategy is, as 3M, we go to Ecolabs, Pillsbury, Target, General Mills, and say, please pay your people poorly and treat them badly so that our turnover rate will go down. This is a doomed strategy. This is going nowhere. So, because this, in fact, is outside the system. This is one of those external variables. So we draw it a different way to remind ourselves that it has an impact in our system, it is a cause, but it's not an effect of anything within our system. That leaves us with only this one to talk about, and it turns out, as I mentioned, that there are 11 different things that cause employee satisfaction. It has to do with the compensation package. It has to do with the quality of your coworkers. It has to do with development opportunities, promotion opportunities, what kind of environment you work in, whether you get funding for training and conferences, whether you're asked to work 40 hours a week or 70 hours a week, whether you can work from a host of things have an impact on employee satisfaction. But it's kind of interesting how it works out, because one of them is promotional opportunities. So work through this with me. As the turnover rate goes up, as the turnover rate changes, how does the number of promotional opportunities change?
It increases.
So as the turnover rate goes up, we have more open positions, so the promotional opportunities go, so they change in the same direction. So that if this goes down, turnover rate goes down, so do the promotional opportunities, right? Assuming a stable organization. Well, it turns out that as promotional opportunities go up, employee satisfaction goes up, because I like to see a clearer career path for me. As employee satisfaction changes, what happens to the turnover rate? Does it change in the same direction or the opposite direction? Opposite direction. So let's walk around this just a couple times. As the turnover rate goes up, promotional opportunities goes up, employee satisfaction goes up, so the turnover rate goes down. As the turnover rate goes down, promotional opportunities go down, therefore employee satisfaction goes down, therefore turnover rate goes back up again. You know, this is just life. This one goes like this. It's called a balancing loop. So that you're actually defeating yourself by, it's like you can't win this game. So what the best you can do is to get it so that instead of going crazy like this, you sort of get it more under control. So you reduce the oscillation, but you can't expect to eliminate it. It's just not reasonable, again, given a stable organization. So the why question is to get us talking about the same thing and understand this is the topic of conversation. The goal is to understand and then intervene. And once you get a clever diagram constructed, you can say, well, what if we were able to change that? What would happen? And you can sort of walk through, well, this would happen, that would be good, and this would happen, that would be good, but then this would also happen, and that's terrible. So maybe we need to do a couple of different things to our system rather than just one thing to get it to perform better. One small editorial thing here. In a different color, I think. I would, in my mind, in my vocabulary, there's a difference between management and leadership. In my mind, it's two different sets of skills. Some people don't see it that way, but I'm going to try to sell you on the idea that management and leadership are two different things. And in my mind, this is good management. Good management is about reducing the variability, increasing the predictability of the system. But if the system needs to be performing like this, good management ain't going to get you there. What's going to happen is good leadership is going to make it go like this. And this, changing the system, that's leadership. Tuning the system, that's management. That's the way I think of it. And there are some people that are really good at this and can't do this, and some people are really good at this and have no clue how to do this, and there's a rare person who can actually do both of those things. A question or
So if you say it again, that management is tuning the system, leadership is changing the system.
right.
Okay.
That's the case that I'm trying to make. And you can't, and if you don't understand how the system works, then your changes are going to be random. They're going to be unpredictable. So the goal is first to understand why are we getting the unacceptable performance from our system? Not whose fault is it? Why are we getting unacceptable performance? And then what do we propose to do about that? We like why questions better than what questions. Because if someone comes to you and says, what can we do about whatever the problem is? What can we do about slipping morale? What is your response going to be? Okay, and after that,
Think about that.
and after that, it's going to be a solution. Well,
Right.
we could do this. But if you don't understand why morale is slipping, what is causing morale to slip, then you're just reacting to the situation. You're reacting to the event of slipping morale. And that's what happens if we get, how can we fix morale? What can we do to stop morale from slipping? When we ask a what or a how question, we tend to get a solution. But the solution is premature because what we don't have yet is understanding of why we're getting what we're getting.
Really, it goes back to that first statement, which is really a problem statement. And,
Yes.
And as you did state, almost invariably when we first make a problem statement, it's either totally wrong or it's substantially wrong, and I'm an ex-3M'er.
Okay.
And we used there was a problem statement worksheet that with the old quality management services materials that 3M was selling. And it was one page where you started with that first problem statement, and then there were a whole bunch of questions that you apply it to. Where does it happen? Where doesn't it happen? When does it happen? When doesn't it happen? And a bunch of others. And when you get done with that at the bottom, after you answer all those questions, then you end up with restating your problem statement. And I've done this with groups, and it amazes them because what you finally end up with as a good problem statement, in many cases, has no relationship at all to what the original problem statement was.
And the medical analogy is often we're trying to treat the presenting symptom instead of the underlying disease. And you can get reimbursed for doing that, but it doesn't help the patient a lot. So the question is, how do we reframe our thinking? So if you think of in terms of having that list of questions, play a mental game here with me. Suppose that was the agenda for a meeting, and we use the systems thinking notation to take the minutes of the meeting. Well, this causes this. As this changes, this changes. So the systems map that we're trying to build is essentially really cool minutes from a really interesting meeting about a really vexing problem.
The triggering question almost comes with the new, it's been for a few years, is the golden circle. Start with why, then you go to how, and then you can figure out what you really want to do. You can make a, so it's a golden circle, like start with why, then you can have a better view of how you can.
And there's, and in conjunction with what he's talking about, there's a technique that's used to be fairly broadly known called 5 whys.
5 whys, yeah.
So
it's
the same kind of thing as, well, that's interesting, why? Well, that's interesting, why is, and so you're ultimately trying to get down to deeper things. We'll look at that in just a second, what I mean by deeper. So part of the value of systems thinking lies in the product itself, the systems map. Our general guideline is that a systems map ought to be reviewable in 45 minutes, maybe an hour, because that's as long as anybody's going to give you to explain something to them. If you can't explain it to me in 45 minutes, you're out of luck, because I only got 45 minutes to spare. So it needs to be something that constrains how much stuff you can have on it. And we like it to fit on one page. So, if you're going to do one page and it's like an ordinary piece of paper, you can't get more than 10 or 12 things on there. So you got to pick the right level to work at to draw the model. And someone may have a more detailed question, and a reasonable response is, that's more detailed and covered by a separate model. Let's talk about this model. This is the one we're talking about, and this is where we're going to guide our interventions from. Part of the value lies in that product that you produce, the cool picture. Part of the value lies in the process, the really interesting conversation that's had. There's no way that the model can represent all the conversation because it just can't. The conversation takes, in the work that I've done with various nonprofit groups and schools and various divisions of 3M, a typical systems thinking effort is going to be 2 or 2.5 hours for 6 people 4 or 5 times. That's a pretty significant investment of time, and for many people, it's a certain number of staff hours, and if you multiply that by burden cost, it could be a $10,000 thing. But if you're working on a $100,000 problem, it's a trivial investment if you treat it like an investment. So part of the value lies in the product, part of the value lies in the process. Because it can be kind of expensive, we recommend it be used in certain circumstances. I have no idea what time it is.
6:40.
Okay. So we'll go through this next part fairly quickly. The 3 challenges, which are chronic, complex, and critical. Chronic, and like like a back injury. You know, I had a back injury and I took some medication and it got better. Then it got worse. So I went to physical therapy and it got better, but then it got worse and then I did something stupid and then I had surgery. You know, it's a chronic problem. You tried something, it got better, but then it came back worse than ever. It's a complex problem because if you can take care of it yourself, take care of it. But if you can't take care of it yourself, you got to involve some other people. That makes it a complex problem. So we got to get multiple brains wrapped around it. The third thing is critical. If it ain't critical, forget about it. We got other stuff to work on. If you have a chronic, complex, critical problem, that's a candidate for systems thinking. And a good team is going to be knowledgeable, vested, and committed. Knowledgeable means they all come bringing something to the party. No one is along for the ride. They're committed in the sense that if we come up with some really shrewd interventions, these are the people who will do them. They will own the follow-through. And the third thing is committed, which means that, and if it works, life will be better for them. So they have a certain degree of commitment to actually making sure that it all happens. These are the archetypes. Success of the successful is the one we were talking about. Tragedy of the Commons was the first one to be documented, 1969, Gareth Hardin. It's in the internet, you can find it. Very briefly, it goes like this. This area right here is a grassy area in the center of our small village. Each of us has got 3 sheep that graze on this thing, and we've been doing this for generations, and it's really cool. Karen decides one winter, man, I was cold and hungry last year, I'm going for 4 sheep. Karen puts 4 sheep, everybody else still only has 3. Next winter we look and say, man, she's doing well. She's got, you know, she's eating better, she's warmer than we are. Next year several people put out 4 sheep, but she goes to 5. Next year several people, everybody puts out 5. Some people go to 6, she goes to 7. Next year everybody is at 2. Why? Because the commons can only support a certain number of sheep. The tragedy of the commons is that we all benefit for ourselves from capitalizing on it, but none of us is responsible for maintaining it. This is the first one of the archetypes to be documented, 1969, Gareth Hardin. We each do something which is individually good but collectively bad. So how do we understand that? Because that happens in lots of different places.
That's actually why the big gardening place, Linder's, that had all the big booths all over town for years went under.
Really?
For exactly that reason. They gave the organization to their kids, and each of the kids got one piece of it.
Yeah.
And they all used the same amount, the same pool of money as if it was all theirs. And they put the whole business, gigantic business, to the ground within 2 years.
Yeah.
So another example. It doesn't have to be a chip manufacturing environment. It could be a completely different kind of a problem. And there are 9 archetypes in the Encyclopedia of Systems Models. The simplest one is fixes that fail. The most complicated one is called accidental adversaries, where you and I started doing something which was a good for a partnership, and then I did something which was good for me, but you perceived it to be bad for you. So you retaliated by doing something which was good for you, but sort of bad for me. And we started out being partners, and we accidentally became adversaries. Deeper. If you're a consultant, right, you have to have an iceberg picture. I think it's one of the unwritten rules. So here's my iceberg picture. We frequently operate at the level of events. Here's an event. Here's another event. Here's another. So like 3M has travel budgets, and 3M likes to send people to conferences. So I give them my brochure in February for the conference I want to go to, which happens to be in October. Because I'm a good citizen, I get the early bird discount. I get my plane reservations, my car reservations, the hotel reservations, the conference reservations. It's all paid for. I'm looking forward to going in October, but then at the 15th of September, here comes a memo from HR saying, oh gosh, travel budget's all used up for the year. If you got anything coming up, cancel it. So you think to yourself, gosh darn, I was really looking forward to doing that. But you go ahead and you get most of your money back. And then next February, you get a flyer for the same conference, so you sign up again. You know, it's going to be in October. It's going to be a great conference. You get all the arrangements made. September 22nd, here comes a note from HR saying, oh gosh, all the travel money's all burned up for the year. If you got anything coming up, cancel and try and get your money back. If you're a truly slow learner, next February you will sign up for the same damn conference. If you're a slightly faster learner, you will say, this is just not good. I'm signing up for a conference in July. It's not as cool a conference. It's not as germane, but there'll still be money in July, so I'm signing up for a July conference because that's. So if we look at each of those cancellations, that's an event. And somehow what we need to do is get deeper than that and say, man, if there's a pattern operating here, every fourth quarter there's no money for travel. What's going on here? And then below that, there's some kind of a structure that's resulting in that. And so the goal of systems thinking is to get to that deeper structure. If we're operating at the event level, all we can do is react. Shoot, I got to cancel it again. If we're operating at the pattern level, I can anticipate saying, I'm not signing up for any more October conferences. I anticipate that it's going to be canceled, right? So what I want to do is to get to the structural level and just have a different kind of pattern generated. What can I do to alter the system to generate a different pattern of happier events? Interventions. We don't just do systems thinking to draw a really cool picture. We do it to guided interventions. There are certain kinds of classic interventions. One is to reduce a delay. One is to change a mental model. In many cases, we have to add a variable that we left out because we just didn't realize how it was impacting the system. In some cases, unfortunately, the best we can do is come up with a really cool picture and then take it to the next higher level of management and say, here's a really cool picture. The thing that is killing us is an external variable at our level, but it's an internal variable at your level. This is what you're doing, and this is the impact it's having on our system at our level, because of the concept of super system, system, and subsystem. We can skip that. We can skip that. We can skip that. This is pointing to the quality story, and this is the sustainability transit thing. This is a bunch of books that you might be interested in.
Testing.
It works. In here too. I direct your attention to the bottom book on the list. It's called Billabong and the Thorn Patch. It is systems thinking for third graders or second graders. You're just barely into chapter books at this point. So the idea here is that systems thinking is not just for graduate students at MIT. Anybody can understand systems thinking if you're given the exposure, given the opportunity, given a language to try to accomplish that.
How's this?
That
works.
Yeah.
Did someone go to talk?
Yeah.
Okay, someone has been dispatched to talk about that. Oh, what?
Try that for now. Turn the volume down to
Dad,
zero.
you was around with all those knobs and buttons and whatnot.
I hear the buttons, but I thought I'd turned it to zero.
Oh, is this better?
Is that better?
Oh.
Let's just see if we hear, if we, here's the cause and effect. If we turn that one all the way down, we don't hear anymore. Either they stop talking or this worked.
It'll be interesting to see on that one. Mic.
Let's just try that,
Okay.
since we're not hearing any more distractions. I've done this work for 3M Company. I've done this work with nonprofits where I've been on the board. I've done this with schools and school districts. This is an example. Ramsey County used to have what's called the Ramsey County Leadership Academy, where each year they would, managers could nominate 10 or 12 people that they thought were sort of fast-track potential people, and they were given 8 or 9 days of specialized training over the course of the year, and my partner Mike Marwa and I were one of those days. So it was a one-day exposure to systems thinking for people at RCLA, the Ramsey County Leadership Academy. The cool thing about that was they put these people, they were 15 or 18, and they put them into teams of 3 that had no connection with one another. And then the people who nominated these people had the chance to offer a problem for these people to think about for the time while they were doing their leadership training. So one of the people who nominated someone was Susan Gardebring, who was the Ramsey County attorney at that point. And her question was about the violence, domestic violence system. The question was, we got this system in place, but it's underutilized. What's up with that? So the people who happened to be on the team thinking about it had nothing to do with Ramsey County law or violence or jails or anything else. It was someone from the Public Works who patched streets, someone from the library, and someone from HR. So none of them had any skin in the game in terms of the domestic violence problem. But they decided to use the systems thinking approach to try to deal with it. And this is the model that they came up with. And the red dotted lines are the interventions that they suggested. Their thought was, we need to understand that, for instance, the way this model reads, without this part, user friendliness of access is driven only by the degree of collaboration and shared understanding of the consequence for children. They said, no, there's something else that makes it friendly, and that's having volunteers. As we increase the use of volunteers, that's going to have an impact on the user friendliness of the system. People get assigned a shepherd to help them work their way through the system. So this was an intervention, putting a new variable on and hooking it into the system. Here there was, this one was troubling for me. One of the people said, well, what about the children? The children are victims of domestic abuse as well. And the response is, oh, no, the children aren't victims, they're witnesses. I said, well, maybe in court they're witnesses, but in common parlance, the kids are the victims of the domestic violence as well. So we had to try and figure out how do we work around that language issue and get them to realize when you're in court, you can talk about the kids as victims. When you're talking to the media, the kids aren't witnesses; they're victims of the domestic abuse as well. So this was an interesting spot, talking about the resilience of kids and just how resilient they are, and how much the domestic abuse father typically against mother actually damages the kids as well. And this is the mental models that go along with it. So for each of these things here, like there's number 10 or number 15 or number 11, there's an explanation on the next page. It says, here's the explanation for number 15 and for 10 and 11. You not only need to have the cool picture, but you need to have the rationale that supports the cool picture. You need to document the mental models. This is how we understand them. This is how these three people on that day understood the world with regard to domestic violence. So now I've been talking for a long time. What questions do you have generally at this point? No questions. Okay.
Okay. So, are we going to then try to think through in a systems manner our dilemma with regard to volunteers? Or?
I think that's the potentially the next step is to do a more of a working session, and apply this information to that, and so thinking about what these things are and kind of what the keys, framing. Did we frame the question correctly? Are we asking the right question or questions? And something that Michael said resonated from what I was looking at was that it's important to get a wide perspective of people on the system. One person cannot adequately develop the system, and because they have their filters, their experiences, their limitations, their experiences. So you need to make sure that when you're doing this, that you have people from a wide perspective of, interaction with the system.
Yeah.
And I know I found that to be true when we were redesigning the website some numbers of years back. We had like a focus group online, what you like, what don't you like about the old system. And it was interesting because people are like, well, I come in it this way and I go into this place and I want this information available. And so the website is a system, a small system, but so it was really interesting when we were designing it. Oh, I want this information here. This is how I come at it. And so people come to the information in different ways. So you needed all those perspectives to be able to design well a system and understand what the consequences of changes to that system.
Yes.
So documenting what it is, kind of the current state, and then any changes that you want to make to the system, and then saying, well, how will this impact it? Where else is this gonna manifest?
Right.
So, but that is what we were talking about. Kind of the next level would be to have more of a working session on a particular system with that for our systems.
One of the other things that struck me as I was talking with Karen, who came over to lunch a couple of weeks ago, two things that came to my mind. One is if we're talking about a volunteer organization, a membership organization, in many ways it's like a for-profit company, except that the people aren't paid to come. And so the same kinds of things,
Steps, right?
the same kinds of things that drive motivation for employees might very well drive motivation for volunteers. If you look at the classic things, Frederick Hertzberg in the 1960s came up with this list. He said, people are job attitudes, but if you think about volunteer attitudes, sense of achievement, sense of recognition, the actual work itself, sense of responsibility, the possibility for advancement, the opportunities for growth. Those are all important things in terms of satisfying employees. There are also some other things which come in sort of second place, which include the quality of the supervision, relationship with your supervisor, the work conditions, the salary, the relationships with peers, and several other things, but they tend to be less important than those first set of things. I also mentioned that the whole process, if you will, the life cycle of a volunteer is a lot like the life cycle of an employee in a workforce management system. It's about identification and recruitment, it's about placement, it's about development and training, it's about succession planning, it's about performance evaluation. All of those things are classic elements of workforce management, and it seems to me they also have a play in terms of volunteer management. You know, how do we get the right people and the right things, give them the opportunity to grow the way they want to grow, do the things they want to do, when in fact we're not paying them to be here.
Good question.
Okay.
We've talked about some things that really, in systems thinking, but we're also talking about problem solving system. And so how these, you know, they're sort of along the same path, but they're not quite the same thing. So how do those two match?
Help me understand what you mean by problem-solving system.
There's a certain series of steps that you go through if you want to try and solve a problem. For example, you were talking about, well, if you ask the question wrong, the first thing you do is get people start throwing out solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But you really need to go through it. There's a distinct set of steps that you really need to go through in order to get enough background information to really understand the problem, so that you can actually come to a solution that you get a root cause. Yeah. Then you can go to from a root cause. Then you can start actually developing possible solutions.
The English major in me has a hard time with the concept of root cause. I understand that it's common parlance, especially amongst the Six Sigma people, because it implies that there is, at the end of the day, there is one ultimate cause. No, it's not.
That's not. I don't think that's a good. I don't think that's an assumption that we make.
Okay. Well, at any rate, irrespective of that, yes, the systems thinking approach is, first let's try to, the process of systems thinking, if you will, first let's pull together people who we think have something germane to the problem we think we want to talk about. Then, once we gather, let's define the problem we want to talk about in terms of a why question, and then let's begin the conversation and document our understandings. Let's reserve the right to draw an arrow that goes back up and says reframe the question, and continue to work on it until we're satisfied that we have identified potentially viable interventions. And in my experience, the interventions are almost never just one. There's usually two or three. They're usually separate in time and space. First you do this in January, then you do this in February, and then you do this in June. And the one you do in June is to mitigate the stuff that happens as a consequence of the ones in January and February, so it doesn't go, so you don't get the bad consequences, or you get less of the bad. I don't think I'm answering your question very well.
The other thing that's bothersome about this whole thing, I mean, I'm very much in favor of systems thinking, and that's the way I spent a lot of my career doing this kind of stuff. But that problem solving is not causal reasoning. It's not done by causal reasoning at all. It's done by pattern recognition.
The systems, going back to the pyramid picture, the iceberg picture. The essence of systems thinking is to get below the patterns, to the structure that's resulting in a pattern, which is resulting in the events. Because what we want to try to do is engage in a structural reform, which is going to generate a different pattern, which is going to produce happier, more satisfactory events. Understanding an event is a data point collection kind of thing. Does that, I still feel like you're not.
This is really important picture right there.
Okay. So as we were sitting at lunch, I was kind of doodling, and I said, here's what I'm hearing, that that somehow, so I'm going to work through this. Get 2 pages up on this thing very well. So can you see okay if I do this? And I'll hold it up before I put it up. One of the, when I'm working with a volunteer organization, one of the things that I want to try to do is to make sure that the volunteers have a sense of value, that they feel like they're getting something in exchange for their commitment of time and energy. Does this make some sense? Okay.
Definitely.
So this says the perceived value of membership. It seems to me like the why question is here ultimately, why is the perceived value of membership not high enough?
Michael just a time check at 7 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you. So if this were the question, then this becomes the central variable, perceived value of membership. And the question is, why is our system not delivering enough value to the members? Why don't they perceive the membership as being a valuable enough thing? Now, if this is not the question you want to talk about, then we could talk about a different question. But if you start with this question and say, well, this is interesting. Let's pretend this is the center of the world. What are the causes of the perceived value, and what are the effects of the perceived value? So at this point, in a traditional systems thinking workshop, what would happen is we have basically 2 extreme approaches. One is I give each of you 3 pads of Post-it notes, and you write down everything you think is part of it, and then we try and figure out how to hook them together. And the other approach is we just start with this one, and we just go back and forth like a Minnesota car in winter, trying to rock ourselves into some kind of motion here. And then there's the hybrid, which is everybody writes down 5 things or 7 things or something. But for pedagogical purposes, for training purposes, I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to go back one, and I'm going to suggest that there is something called the level of overall satisfaction, and that is what causes the perceived value. That as the level of overall satisfaction changes, that causes the perceived value to change. The more satisfied I am, the more valuable I think it is. You notice that each of these variables has got a noun or a noun phrase for English-speaking English grammarians. It's not a verb. It's something which can go up and down over time. So it's not a process. It's not like raise satisfaction. Or something like that, which can be quantified. Now, it doesn't mean it can be measured. It doesn't mean we can measure it scientifically. It's like if I were, all of you have either been bosses or have had bosses, right? So if this were the boss effectiveness meter, it would be way cool if I could walk into your organization and sort of go like this with my meter and say, 72.4, not bad. Now, we don't have that. 3M guys are working on it, but we don't have it yet. Nonetheless, any of you can walk into an organization and in about 5 minutes get a sense of what the satisfaction is with the management. And you can come back a month later and say it's gone up or it's gone down, or it's still the same. We don't have a way to quantify it very accurately, but it's certainly something we can measure. Okay? So if we were to say, this is what causes this, and I'm going to ask you to just sort of buy my argument for a few seconds, and then we'll take it apart afterwards. So I'm going to make a suggestion that kind of goes like this. That as the level of satisfaction goes up, the perceived value goes up. As the level of satisfaction goes down, the perceived value goes down. Okay? As a consequence of the perceived value, my amount of loyalty changes. That the more satisfaction I get, the more value I see, and the more loyal I am to the organization. Now, we should also be documenting mental models here, and I actually did document the mental models for these as I was sitting at my computer doodling with this. But here this has to do with the commitment to the organization's success. The more value I get from it, the more value I perceive in it, the more I'm committed to trying to help the organization succeed so other people can get that kind of benefit as well. That's the mental model that I would put in there. And I would try to make the case that this one says level of intended commitment. That as the level of amount of loyalty goes up, my intention to commit to do good things, my intention to volunteer, my intention to be part of the committee, my intention to attend the meetings goes up, the level of intended stuff. And that as the level of intended stuff goes up, the actual commitment, the actual involvement goes up. And I may not have the words exactly right here, but I think you get the idea. That as the intended commitment goes up, eventually the actual commitment goes up. But these are not the same thing. I can intend to do really good things, but not actually do them, right? That is not simply my level of intended commitments that drives my actual commitment. It's also driven by something which I will call the fit with everything else in my life. So that as the level of satisfaction goes up, the perceived value goes up, the loyalty goes up, the level of intended commitment or intended involvement goes up, which leads to the actual involvement, except that there's this other thing called everything else in my life. And even though I may be fabulously loyal and think this is a fabulously valuable organization, if this is 11th on my list of 10 things to do, it is not going to happen. So if my commitment is to kids and soccer games, or if it's to full-time employment or whatever it is to, there are other things that are going to cause this thing. You might then say something like, some people join an organization for the networking opportunities, the chance to get to know other like-minded folks and exchange ideas, and it might have something to do with job searches and so forth, or maybe not. But if I have this thing called the quality of networking, I would say that maybe it's my actual commitment to being at the meetings that leads to the quality of networking changing in the same direction. Is this making sense so far? Then to arbitrarily and for teaching purposes, let's pretend that this connects back to this. So now what we have is, what we really want to do is to get more people committed to the organization, but somehow what we need to work on may be over here, a different spot, because of the way it filters through the diagram. Satisfaction goes up, value goes up, loyalty goes up, intention goes up, actual commitment goes up, quality of networking goes up, which means the level of satisfaction goes up even higher for the people who want networking. So this goes up higher and higher and higher if it's going up, right? If it's spiraling up. But if it's spiraling down, the satisfaction goes down, so the perceived value goes down, so the loyalty goes down, so the level of intended commitment goes down, so the actual commitment goes down, so the quality of networking goes down, so the level of satisfaction goes down even lower. We are now circling the drain. But it's the same system either way. It's the same system, whether it's going up or going down. So the question for leadership then becomes, if this is true, then how do we get it going the right way? You familiar with the work of Jim Collins and Good to Great?
Yep.
In that book, he talks about the flywheel concept, right? This is a flywheel. The flywheel has an enormous amount of energy once we get it started going the right direction. The question is, how do we, as leaders within the organization, get it to go in the right direction? And at this point, this is a very preliminary view. It may be wrong. There are certainly things which are not there, but it's the systems thinking approach is to document how do we understand the world to work. There are probably 6 other things that cause the level of satisfaction. For some people, it might be the chance to teach what they already know. For other people, it might be a chance to learn something they don't know. For other people, it might be a chance to be, I'm at my organization, I'm at the plankton level, but in a volunteer organization, I might be able to be a project chair or a committee chair and have a chance to be much more involved in decisions and direction. So it might be growth opportunities that the person's looking for. So the question becomes, what is it that people are looking for that's going to drive the level of satisfaction, which is going to drive the perceived value? Because we also know things like this. Well, I'm guessing things like this because I'm not part of your organization. But I'm guessing that people who are more loyal are more likely to stay with the organization. So as the loyalty goes up, the retention rate also goes up, right? If you're like many organizations, you do some kind of marketing to try and get new members. So you may have a variable called the cost of recruiting. And as the retention rate goes up, what happens to the cost of recruiting?
Should go down.
It should go down because the recruiting is going to be more, word of mouth. It's going to be less expensive kinds of marketing campaigns, less expensive 3-color brochures printed and mailed out to everybody on the planet. And then this somehow probably connects back in again somewhere. So, question?
Well, you have to also consider the cost of joining, like the financial cost, right?
Okay.
I know a lot of people get support from their company. My company, for instance, pays for the membership, but that's just about it. That's all the support I'm getting from them right now. Anyway, so once they quit paying for that, am I willing to, I've been with ASQ for lots and lots of years, but make it easier, then I'm just only an associate member.
So if we had one called personal costs, which means not only out-of-pocket expenses, but maybe the time that I'm not doing something else because I'm here, whether it's fishing or, God help us, golf or something like that.
Not a golfer.
This probably fits in here someplace too. And so you may, it maybe goes like this: as personal costs goes up, the level of satisfaction goes down. So we could, and the cool thing about doing this with a whiteboard and Post-it notes, which are made by 3M Company, in which I still have shares of stock, please go out and buy some, is that you can rearrange them very easily. And so you can modify the display of the system quite dynamically until you get something which is stable and comfortable and points you toward interventions, which you can then do thought experiments with. Oh, what if we did this? If we lowered this, that would raise this, presumably, if this is right. But it's not the only thing causing it. This is also causing it. So this might not be the whole answer, but it might be part of the answer. So this is the intention of systems thinking, is to say, what are the causes and the effects that operate in our system which are producing the currently unacceptable performance on the critical variable, which is the one we identified in the why question. Now,
How do you know how to scope your system? So, because you can kind of keep going, especially with something like this. You said there are several factors that go into the level of overall satisfaction. So how far do you, I don't know, how deep do you go? How far do you go when you're scoping the system?
It's important that you scale it appropriately. How's that for a non-answer?
Yeah.
Here's the way. If you're the CEO, this is your view of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing is inside your system. Maybe that's the allocation of money toward training and development. And it's just another variable in the system for you at the CEO level. If you're a division general manager, you have the amount of money that's allocated for training and development, and it is an impact on your system in terms of how attractive you can make offers to people and how much promoting you can do and how many conferences you can send people to. And you have this kind of a system operating. But what's inside the system at this level is outside the system at this level.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This is an important thing to understand. Now, if we go down to the project leader level, he's got some things he can do, and he's got all these things connected in these circles and so forth. But this thing, which is inside at the GM level, is outside. It's outside at the project manager's level. So sometimes the best thing you can do is to say, look, this is the picture as I understand it. There's a picture below that, I know that. But I really want to help you, CEO, understand that this is inside your system, but it is hammering us at our level. And you can make all the expectations and stuff you want, but this is the critical variable in our system, unless I'm understanding it wrong. And if this is not how you understand the system, help me see how you understand the system. Because this is the way that me and my team understand it. So what's the right scope? The right scope is one page, 10 or 12 variables.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases you may have personal costs. Maybe when we talk about personal costs, we mean travel time. I don't mind working 8 hours a day, but I don't like spending an hour and a half going each way, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm working 11 hours for 8 hours of pay. So in my mind, travel time is a cost. The actual fees are a cost. The time that I'm not playing golf is a lost opportunity cost.
Mm-hmm.
So I might have another post-it note underneath here which explains what I mean by all those things in more detail, which essentially becomes a kind of a glossary.
Okay.
This is what we meant when we used this variable name.
Okay, gotcha.
In some cases, I may actually develop a whole separate layer, so that, wouldn't it be cool if I could just go, and this would expand, and I would be able to see how the system operates that really drives that variable.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I need to do that,
Right.
to show people that I actually thought about that, and I understand recruiting and it costs are. There are radically different understandings of what costs of recruiting are. Some people say it only counts postage, and some people say no. If you got to spend 14 hours spending on working on a fabulous document, that's part of the cost of recruitment. Because you could be doing something else with those 14 hours, perhaps, which might be more valuable to the organization. On the other hand, it may be that marketing is what you really want to get into, and this is the outlet for you to demonstrate your marketing skills and hone those skills, and so this is a really valuable thing for you to be doing. But we don't know that unless we talk about why is it that people join your organization, what is it that's going to raise their satisfaction, what is it that they consider to be valuable about their membership. So the question of scaling or scoping is, it needs to be big enough so that either you can identify some interventions, or you can confidently throw up your hands and say, woe is me, there's nothing I can do about this. I tend to be not very particularly taken with people who have the response of, woe is me, there's nothing I can do about this. That kind of victim mentality doesn't fly very far in my world. This is like the same kind of thing as when somebody says, well, I had to do that, I didn't have any choice. I think, really? Really you didn't have any choice? Or you just preferred not to entertain the possibility of choices? Mm-hmm. If you choose to try the systems thinking approach to the problem you're talking about, members and value, and what are the processes that bring value to individual members, I think that this is this constitutes a chronic, complex, critical problem.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore to be a likely candidate for a systems thinking effort.
Okay.
And now what you've had is 40 minutes of me presenting what it's like to do this. It's a lot messier when you're doing it in real time with an issue that you actually have a skin in the game.
Oh, I would imagine that there's contention over, no, this works this way, or this has this impact. And
so another time I was asked to work with the Tech 3M has something called Tech Forum. Tech Forum is like 7,000 or 8,000 people who are not the IT technical people, but the scientists and engineer kind of technical, research kind of technical people. And the question came up about the quality awards program, oddly enough. And so I was asked to facilitate a systems thinking session. What can we do about the quality awards program? That was the question, not why something, but what can we do about it? So I pulled together, my friend Dale Lawson pulled together a group, and I got, oddly enough, one person sitting here and one person sitting here. And the person sitting here, I said, what do you think about this? And this person says, the problem is we have too many quality awards. It used to be you only got a quality award for something significant. Now you get a quality award if you show up 5 days in a row. Person over here says, no. Thing is, we need more quality awards because everybody likes to get quality awards and they boost morale. Well, so this person's response is more quality awards, and this person's response is fewer quality awards, and then you got to say, well, that's interesting. Now we start going into the 5 whys kind of stuff. Now we need to go a little deeper. Why is it that you think people like to get quality awards? Well, it turns out it's the only kind of recognition they get. And then so why is that the case? Well, because our managers are not very good at giving timely and specific feedback. Well, why is that? Well, because it isn't part of, they're not held accountable for it, and then no one ever taught them how to do it. Well, isn't that, so now the root cause intervention is we need to get managers better trained in the importance and value and utility of timely and specific feedback. But so now on the other side, you got this other thing going on. So it's the resolution of that, which is, oh man. What time is it?
7:22.
Okay. Over the course of, let's see, I started working when I was for an actual employer when I was 16, and now I'm 66, so I've been working for people for 50 years. Including a variety of employers. I was a steel worker for a while. I was a soldier for a while. I was a computer programmer for a long time and sort of slid into human resources organization development work. I worked for Hennepin County, public sector. I worked for Target stores, a large, very narrowly focused retail organization. I worked for 3M, a large, seemingly unfocused organization on that standard. I've done stuff in a variety of nonprofits. Over the course of that time, I have distilled my thinking about leadership down into this. At the bottom of the world, there are beliefs. Ashesh, you have, I'm going to hazard a guess, 104,926 beliefs. There are beliefs about tall people, short people, people from India, people not from India, people from England versus people from Bangladesh. People with dark hair, people with no hair, people with small kids, people without small kids, old people, retired people, different kind of cars, where to live, about religion. You got all these beliefs, and they add up to who you are. And you got 104,000 as well, but only about 30,000 are the same as his. There's beliefs. Then there's something called values. Everybody's got a handful of values that they're willing to go to the mat for. We do an exercise where we give people 48, and we make them distill it down to a list of just what are the 5 you're willing to fight about? What are the 5 where if someone violates this, there's going to be consequences to be paid? And then we say, and what's the chances that all of us have the same final 5? No chance in hell.
Yeah.
Out of a group of 10 people, we won't all have 1 in common. That would be my prediction. Out of 10 people, we won't have 1 in common. Nonetheless, we have to work together, even though we have different values. How does that work out? Well, it works out because we're able to engage in dialogue. Dialogue is a special kind of communication where it's like you come in knowing some stuff, and you come in knowing some stuff, and I come in knowing some stuff. We're facing a tough problem. None of what we have individually is going to take care of it. Somehow we have to combine what we know into new knowledge that none of us had when we came into the room. So we need to take your knowledge and your knowledge and my knowledge and put it together and massage it and bake it and come out with a third-baked or maybe a half-baked idea. But it takes all of our contributions to do that. It takes, and that happens through something which we call dialogue. The goal of all that is to get to the point where we have trust. If we trust one another, we can do amazing things. If we don't trust one another, we are going to be hamstrung. Once we have trust in place, we can use something called influence. If I trust you, you can influence me. If you don't trust me, you might be able to make me do it, but that's power, that's not influence. Once we have influence in place, now we can talk about trying to drive some changes. Typically, we want to use our influence to initiate and move forward some kind of a change. As soon as we start to try and do some kind of change, we wind up running into complexity. And this is where system thinking comes into play. System thinking depends on your ability to engage in dialogue. If you can't do dialogue, you can't do systems thinking. Once we think we have the system under control, we try something, and it turns out it didn't work out what we expected. There's uncertainty. Regardless of how sure you are, how clear you are about the system, there's still going to be uncertainty in what's going to happen. Over here we have another loop. This is called personal intentions. This is all on my website, by the way, which is going to be on the front page of the handout, which is going to get you at some point.
Before I leave here, I will email it. Before I leave here.
Personal intentions. This is what I want to be when I grow up. I am personally still working on that. Over here, there's something called organizational expectations, which is what does this particular organization expect of me? Whether it's a volunteer organization, a board that I serve on, my family, a bowling team, an employer. What is it that they expect? And then something that doesn't fit on the paper because it's too big is culture. All of this plays out against the backdrop of your culture that prevails in that institution. In a perfect world, here's what we'd like to have happen. These two things go like this. And it turns out that what I want to do is exactly what the organization wants me to do. That's a fabulous fit. When the things that I'm good at, the things that I have a gift for, the things that I really want to do, are things that the organization needs to have done. That's what they're expecting me to do. That's if you can get that so that they can come closer and closer, that's goodness. You notice that down here, this one touches beliefs, this one does not touch beliefs, because organizations can't have beliefs. The Supreme Court has it wrong when they talk about an organization having beliefs about religion. An organization can't have religious beliefs because it doesn't have a mind, it doesn't have a heart, it doesn't have a soul. So it can't have beliefs. People have beliefs. People have thousands, tens of thousands of beliefs. Organizations do not have beliefs, but organizations do have values. At 3M, we value innovation, we value collaboration, we value teamwork, we value candor, we value treating the customer with integrity and respect. Those are organizational values. Now, that was a really long answer to a question. And the question was,
Scoping.
what?
Scoping the problem.
That was the question before that question. It was the question after that question. And my train of thought got derailed.
You'll get it.
Yeah, about 2 o'clock in the morning. This is the model that we use, and we like this because it allows us to say this is the way we develop stuff. Our coursework kind of goes around and around, but we keep coming back to, if you ain't got trust, you ain't got nothing. Somehow the goal is to get to a high trust organization. The research is crystal clear, looking at high trust organizations and less high trust organizations. In the business world, high trust organizations are more profitable in the same industry, in the same markets. In schools, high trust schools, kids do better academically than in low trust schools. The research is crystal clear, solid on this.
Well, and then Gallup just published their book recently on strengths-based leadership, which says what followers want is trust, compassion, stability, and hope. Trust and compassion are very similar. Stability and hope are very similar if you think about it. You know.
Yeah.
But trust is kind of, I think, the foundation. I like that you said that you need trust for influence, because I think of influence as really three components: the ethos, logos, and pathos. And for influence, and it's got to have, if you don't have the ethos, which is the trust, your credibility, you can't have influence. So I mean, it's all tied together there.
We could have a great philosophical discussion some night over a pitcher of adult beverages.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of trying. I'll talk some more and see if the question comes back to me. System thinking comes into play at this point, where we're looking at a complex problem. We're trying to pull people together who trust each other enough that they're willing to engage in dialogue, which means perhaps exposing your values.
I think that's what we were talking about. It was the going back and forth.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
That was the going back
yes.
and forth.
So the going back and forth was these two people have these diametrically divergent understandings of how the system works, and we need to dig deeper to do that. And digging deeper means engaging in dialogue. Gosh, and so an appropriate response is, she says to me, well, I think here's how I see the world works. An inappropriate response is, you need to have your medication adjusted then. You're familiar with something called the ladder of inference?
I'm sorry, what?
Ladder of inference. The premise of the ladder, this is part of our work too. The premise of the ladder of inference is each of us looks at a base of data, and then once we look at the base of data, we start going different places as we climb a ladder of inference till we get to the top and have a different view of the world. Mm-hmm. So the data is someone walks into the room at a certain time, and what I notice is that person came in at that time. That's the data. Now to that, what I add is, that means she's late. That's meaning that I added to the data if she arrived at that time. Based on the meaning that I've added, I conclude that she was caught in traffic. The assumption I make is she was trying her best to be here on time. I believe she's a good person. I'll invite her again next time. So now my action, invite her again next time, is not driven by the data, but all that crap that happened after I moved away from the data. Meanwhile, you looked at it and went to a completely different. So you're up this ladder and I'm up this ladder. We have a different view of the world, right? And then the more sinister people would say, yes, and my goal in life is to get you off of your ladder and onto my ladder because I have the right ladder.
I've never met anybody like that.
No, I live with one.
Yeah.
Which shuts down the dialogue immediately.
Yeah.
So the 5 whys is a technique. The ladder of inference is a technique. They're both documented in something called the 5th Discipline Field Book, which is a red-covered book that's about this thick with lots of other cool things in it from 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, about that.
So this willingness to engage in dialogue is part of how we get the different perspectives to arrive at some kind of thing where they can agree about it, but it may mean digging deeper, and it may mean at some point we say, well, we just don't agree about that. My beliefs just won't let me go there. Your beliefs are just so different from my beliefs, I just can't go there. And then then the question is, now what do we do? What do we do if we can't reconcile that?
If your beliefs, if two people are diametrically opposed or have just markedly different beliefs, you're gonna have a heck of a time even getting what you put on the chart there.
Yeah.
You won't even get there.
It could be. My former business partner, sort of a personal revelation here. My former business partner is named Mike Marwa. He's a fundamentalist, right-wing Christian, and I'm not. We were very effective business partners, even though we had some very divergent beliefs. And the way we figured out how to work with one another was, given a particular predicament, we would both do the same thing. Just that I would do it for this reason, and he would do it for a different reason, but we would both do the same thing. So we just didn't talk about why we were doing it. We just talked about what we were going to do. Because we didn't want to fight about the beliefs, because he was not going to change my mind, and I'm not going to change his mind. Those are too deeply held, too powerfully in place.
Can't change beliefs very easily.
And in fact, most of the beliefs that you have, the 104,000, most of them you probably don't know where they came from. They're just part of the culture that you grew up in. So some people define culture as everything that you know that you don't know you know. Everything that's just part of the milieu is, unless you went through some kind of a conversion experience, and you'd say, yep, I started, on January 1st, 1974, I became Jewish, and that's when I got these beliefs, because that was a point in time and it's fixed. Or, I can remember a specific time when my Aunt Pearl told me I was not a very good artist. And I was 4 years old, and so for the last 62 years I believed I'm not a very good artist because my Aunt Pearl said so, and she was my aunt and she ought to know. So unless let's specific things like that, you can anchor them. Otherwise, they're just there, and most of them go unexamined, unless you get into a conversation like, "So, gosh, that's interesting. Help me understand how you got there. I don't get that." So, if you have a chronic, complex, critical problem, systems thinking as an approach, you wind up with something like this. The goal then is to say, now that I've got this kind of an understanding, what might I do to get this to go up? Where do I intervene to get this to go up? And it might be you have to intervene way over here because it plays through this and then plays through this and then plays through this and then plays through this and finally gets here. But this is the high leverage spot. What we're looking for in interventions is high leverage and self-sustaining durability, where I don't have to keep doing it over and over again. So it's, again, once I can get that flywheel going in the right direction, the flywheel is going to sort of maintain its own energy.
Seems like we have to ask, actually, now 4 questions, really. What interventions are appropriate? Where do we need to apply those interventions? When do we need to apply those, and who's going to do those?
And how will we know whether they worked?
Yeah, that's the pipeline. Yeah.
Because if you don't know whether they worked, I could tell more stories about schools, but I won't go there now.
Yeah, but you have to apply all that to that, just like the one chart you showed up there
Right.
with the interventions. But it's not just a simple, okay, I'm going to throw one here,
Right.
throw one there.
So these were very carefully thought out. That was loud. These were very carefully thought out. What's kind of interesting is in the Ramsey County Leadership Academy, what happened was that the people who developed this model, a public works guy, an HR officer, and a librarian, had to present the model that they developed to the Ramsey County attorney. This is a fairly significant job in Ramsey County, being a Ramsey County attorney. She has a lot of people working for her, a lot of budget, and these 3 people had to stand up in front of her and explain, this is how we understand the system to work, and this is what we think you ought to do to make it better, and justify these interventions to that woman. So they spent a lot of time thinking about it, and spent a lot of time thinking about how they were going to present it. But you notice it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 or 14 variables. It's got a couple of loops. It's got a loop over here, which is a reinforcing loop. It's got a loop up here, which is a balancing loop. And these things were not actually parts of loops in the original one because they had nothing going in at one pot there. And the interventions completed the loops, closed the loops, so to speak. So do you think this has some viability, some potential utility for your group?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like, there were a couple things that you said is particularly related to the scope question on really just being able to articulate, this is a system, this is our understanding of the system. Doesn't mean it can't change. Dialogue around that. And then I kind of like this idea to be able to justify and to explain, we're taking this intervention, we're intervening here and here, and this is what we expect to happen. This is how we're going to monitor it.
This is a critical point. Is when you intervene in the system, you have intended consequences. Mm-hmm. We are intervening here and here and here in order to get this positive result. Ayers' law of complex systems is, when you intervene in a complex system, you may or may not get the intended consequence. You will always get unintended consequences.
Yep.
Whenever you perturb a complex system, something's going to happen you didn't expect.
Well, that's true, but and part of the conversation is if we intervene here, what do we think is going to happen, and what are possibilities? What are a broad range of possibilities that could happen to try to understand and mitigate the unintended consequences so they're less unexpected. And huh? What?
Almost like a soft FMEA.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, because I hear elements of PDCA. I mean, or PDSA
Yes.
in the new world, but it'll always be PDCA to me. But in terms of, you know, here's the first intervention, then here's a second intervention, and then here's an intervention we're going to take to mitigate this intervention that we took up here. So that's that PDSA piece of that as well. I see elements of that.
So when we take something like this, which I'm going to call an external variable, we do something to indicate that it's an external variable, and that it has an arrow coming out and no arrows going in on
Right.
purpose. So we mark the corner, or we shade it, or we do something to remind us that regardless of what happens here, this is still going to be a factor, and this is outside of our system. Now, in some cases, you may have identified something as being outside your system, but through a clever intervention, you can figure out a way to bring it into your system. So this, instead of being simply a cause, also becomes an effect. That's a clever kind of intervention if you can figure out a way to do that. To take something which has been viewed as woe is me, there's nothing I can do about it. Figure out, wait a minute, there is something I can do about it. That kind of clever intervention can be very powerful.
That's I think how they do mergers and acquisitions sometimes in the business world. You know, I want to get control of this. I now own you.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
Definitely was part of it.
Not always a good decision, but that's, you know, I think what they do sometimes. So maybe for different reasons, but so time check 7:40. So anybody else have questions? I know I've been kind of popping in with my stuff. Anybody back there on this?
The interventions that we impose on a system, it also seems that they're not all going to be equally impactful. Some are going to be more equal than others, right?
Well, that's what he was talking about.
So, I mean,
high
there
leverage.
are some that are just going to support what we're doing, and some that if the interventions fail, will break the system.
Yeah, that gets us into a religious debate. So let me frame the religious debate. On this side of the room are people who believe in systems thinking. On this part of the room, there are people who believe in system dynamics. Systems dynamics people want to create a computer model of the system, which means that you have to have discrete values for everything.
Yeah.
And you have to have, like, this is important, but this is twice as important, and this is only half as important. And you have to do that if you're going to build a computer simulation. And in my mind, you can do that really well if you have a system which is stable with lots and lots of data, and you're willing to go ahead and build that computerized model. So in my mind, this is brain surgery. Over here is systems thinking, which is I can't put a hard number on this. What's more important to Ralph? His intention to be committed or everything else in his life? How does Ralph compare to Mary? I can't give these things numbers in terms of how much influence they have here because it's different for every person, and it may be different from day to day and week to week and year to year. So I can't build a computer simulation to do this because I can't say what's most important. So this is, if that's brain surgery, this is first aid. Everybody got to know first aid. Everybody has to be able to systems think. Some people need to know how to do system dynamics. If I want system dynamics done, I'm going to hire somebody to do it for me because I'm not going to spend the time to learn how to do it. Over here, I think everybody who's a leader in an organization needs to know how to do systems thinking. I think it's at the first aid level of knowledge.
How do you do we talked about identifying the high leverage interventions. Is that, how do we quantify that, or how do you decide on, that these are the 2-3 things that you're going to do?
That's a good question. One way to do it is through the thought experiments. which of these is going to have the most profound impact on what we do. Another way is to look for something like this. Suppose I have a situation where this goes to here, and 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 something goes in here, and this goes to here, and this goes to here. So I have this situation where here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 causes 2, which causes 3, which causes 4, but 1 also causes 5, and 1 also causes 6, which causes, and 5 causes 2. What you look at in this one and say, this is a high leverage spot right here, because this has a triple whammy by the time it gets down here. It not only, because it also impacts this one, but through the interconnections, it has a multiplying effect. It has more than one path to have an impact down here. So this kind of a thing can be a high leverage point, because a change here is magnified through other kinds of intervening variables. It could also work the other way, where it's a low leverage point, because its impact is mitigated through these things and reduced, because these things are going to put brakes on it.
Okay.
So it's going to be more likely to be one way or the other, and just not just sort of an average one.
Okay.
But frequently it's the high leverage ones.
And so a high leverage issue is one where we might want to focus our resources.
Get bigger bang for our buck.
Yeah.
Yes. Bigger bang for your buck is identifying a high leverage reason. It's a high leverage intervention. Where can we spend the least amount of money and see the most profound positive impact, and the least profound negative impacts as we understand the system.
Yeah.
But then once we intervene, paying attention to say, now what else is happening that we weren't expecting?
Yeah.
See how's the system changing as a result of the intervention, both positive and
or our
negative,
perception
intended
of
and
the
unintended, so that we can make
which gets you
other
right back to
interventions.
Karen mentioned pulling together a group of people because you have different filters. So while I might notice one thing, you might notice something completely different, because you're looking at it from a different perspective with a different set of values and a different set of beliefs. So that's again the multiple perspective value of having that team sort of get back together over the course of time and say, we intervened with this intention. Did we get what we wanted? Did we get some stuff we didn't want? Did we get some other stuff which we didn't expect, but also actually turns out to be kind of a cool unintended consequence?
Yeah, because we usually apply a negative label to unintended consequences, but it's not always.
Yeah.
It's not always
Not
bad.
always bad.
Yeah. So it's unintended positive, unintended negative.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, my goal tonight was to confuse you. So I hope I've succeeded.
Do you have another question, Wayne?
Yeah, there's on the upfront part of this, trying to build these things, one of them is data collection. What do we know about what happens around the system as we're trying to put it together, as we're trying to make a picture of it? So, for example, we know a lot. We have a lot of data for our own section as well as for the whole society about member retention, renewal rates, those kinds of things, and even something more impactful in that we know that we know new members that come in, they make their decision whether they're going to stay for a second year remarkably quickly into their during their first year. It's as little as 3 months. They're already decided whether they're going to renew after the first year, and so we need all that data up front, because that impacts, one, how do we describe the system, and secondly, it also puts time factor and urgency on how and when we're going to do our interventions, which is what our project is.
Yeah. So yeah, it does change that more data we have, because I thought the same thing. We've got like the voice of the customer, customer satisfaction and loyalty survey identified 16 drivers, and you know, those things are all part of the system, you know, that need to be.
It doesn't do any good to send a letter, which the society, the headquarters of the society sends a letter to somebody who did not renew. Why didn't you renew?
Yeah.
Well,
too late.
It's already too late.
Horses left the
It's
corral.
waste of time.
Door was open,
Yeah.
the horse was done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, and those are all things that are important to bring into the conversation, but also recognizing too that it changes the system. So you can't have it's not static. Today they might make that decision in 3 months. Down the road, it might be 6 months. You know, when we make changes, so we have to make sure that we.
There's nothing wrong with 6 months because it's basically the same decision at 6 months.
Right.
They've already decided.
Yeah.
3 months to give them information that makes them want to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, but the system is always designed based on our understanding level of knowledge today.
So can I ask, I mean, we don't talk about money ever here, but who's paying their own membership? Paying their own membership?
Right.
So, and I'm thinking that maybe we need to like just approach employers and convince them of the value of this organization altogether. Why should they get involved and have people involved and pay for ASQ memberships? And
You know,
see a value in it?
that could be an intervention, is that we bypass the personal, the individuals and go to the employers. I mean, that's a possible intervention.
Well,
And
on one hand, what you've done is you've redefined this
right,
Right.
and said it's not to the individual but to the organization.
yeah,
Loyalty, all those things will have to be reassessed because
Yeah.
it'll change the whole dynamics
yeah,
of why the individual is participating and why they would want to volunteer beyond that, because basically you're having someone else make that decision for them.
yeah.
It goes back to the concept, if you give someone something free, they're less invested to commit further to it.
Not free. It's
Yeah.
free.
Well, it's because
But if
the
you're not-
payer and the receiver. I mean, it's
But
the
they
problem
have
that
to,
we
they
have.
have to deem that
Yeah.
value, that there's a value there.
It's the problem that we have with healthcare, is the third-party payer system. You know, so you become divorced from the actual cost and the value. So I mean, that's, you know, certainly one way, but that, you're right, it does change how you define your system. So
Well, it would, yes, you'd have to start over, but I'm not sure how radically different the model would wind up being. Just you'd be asking the company instead of the individual, because, you know, I've got a certain amount of money to spend on memberships for my staff. Do I want to put it on ASQ, or should I spend it on ASTD or some other organization? You know, but it gets back to how satisfied. In the world of training, there's something called Kirkpatrick levels of value. The level 1 Kirkpatrick measurement is at the end of a training session. We give everybody what we call the smile sheet, and you say, how did the training go? And the questions are, were the chairs comfortable? Was the room the right temperature? Did the instructor make you feel welcome? Was there the right balance between presentation and question and answer? Well, you know, that's pretty trivial. That's level 1. Level 2 is, we give you a different set of questions, which is, you feel like you learned anything? It's you know, several questions, but it's at that level. The next level is, we go to your coworkers and we say, you know, Bob was at there, Ashesh was at this training. Is he any smarter now when it comes to these kinds of things, which is what this training was supposed to make him smarter about? That's level 3. Level 4 is when you go to the company and say, you sent Ashesh to this training. Is he doing stuff which makes your company a more valuable company now? Which is not what did he learn, but what is he doing that's having a positive impact on the bottom or the top line. And the gold standard is, can we measure stuff at Kirkpatrick level 4? How do we look at it and say, the people who have gone through this, who've been members here, how do we demonstrate that they are being more effective for their organizations, making smarter decisions, saving money, reducing costs, increasing revenue, reducing costs, avoiding costs, or improving customer service? So again, my goal was to confuse you, expose you to a technique which you might find useful. There's a host of resources. On my website, there's a series of videos. There's series of videos I did for Intermediate District 287, where we did a simulation of systems thinking workshop, which takes probably 40 minutes to watch or something. It's like 6 or 8 couple of minute pieces and talking heads in between. There's a primer, a verbal primer for the people who like to read, also on my website. There's some books listed on the back of the presentation, which she either has or will email to you. There are resources around town if you want to hire somebody to do this.
I think this was great, Michael. I really appreciate the grounding in specifics. I'm familiar with systems thinking, but this, I think, kind of got us grounded in how we might apply this for our particular problem or situation, I guess, and how do we, reframe, our conversation with using systems thinking. So I think, kind of to Wayne's question earlier about problem solving and systems thinking, it, to me, and I was thinking about this as we went on, we have, I think you said get deeper to the infrastructure, so look beyond the patterns. But I think the systems thinking, they coexist, problem solving and system thinking, but making sure that you get to, it's not really root causes, but high leverage. To me, it's helping to understand that there are, and we talked about this at lunch, multiple ways to skin a cat. So there are, if you don't think about it in a linear way, it's more abstract to say there are a variety of ways to solve this problem. It's not kind of one-to-one. Here's the problem, here's the solution. It's here's the problem, this is how we want to change some factor, and then here are a multitude of potential solutions. Which one is going to have the highest impact?
And the problem framing piece is what comes first.
Right.
And there are lots of different books out on how to frame problems. This is one way to frame problems with a why question. There's a book out by a guy named Bohl and Dielman, who look at, they suggest there's four fundamental ways to frame problems. It's a political problem, it's a structural problem, it's a resource problem, it's a human resources problem. And no matter what problem you look at, it's one of those, if you review it through one of those 4 lenses. But depending on which lens you look through, it exposes you, it opens up different opportunities. And the value for something like that for me is that the political problem never enters my mind. Never enters my mind this is a political problem. I'm always looking at the other ones, but it never dawns on me that this is a political issue. And the other things are irrelevant because it's all about the politics of this situation. Because that's just not part of my nature.
To me, it almost comes down to that model that you have in your back is like individuals have belief, values, comes the dialogue. We as an organization have to have an honest dialogue that what is the kind of culture we're trying to integrate. Then comes the trust. Can you trust this organization to further your value or the culture that you're trying to integrate in a company or a person? And then you influence saying, here is where we are, this is the direction we're setting. I think there is going to be issues. That's why I keep thinking when you said, when you bring those two into a middle and that's when it aligns, how I was visualizing this whole thing. So you have this on your website too?
Yes. Along with an explanation of what it means.
No, I just, as you were talking, I quickly made a note because this was something that really interested in terms of.
It might say change or it might say transition here. It depends on which version is on the website, but it's an English major thing. And when we talk about change, we talk about transition. Most people talk about change. The purist would say the change is instantaneous. The transition is where the trouble is. Once the changes happen, it's how people handle the transition where we get stuck. And so we should talk about transition, not change. But that's not common language. So.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Appreciate your Wednesday evening. Thank you, Michael, again for
Thank you.
Thank you
um,
very much.
being here.